Welcome back to our channel, Creepy Diaries. Ever had a paranormal or unexplainable experience while working or visiting a place at night? Today, I'm gonna share with you 3 spine-tingling stories that'll make you think twice about taking a night shift alone. These are tales from night workers at late-night restaurants and convenience stores who have encountered events that defy logical explanation. From unexpected apparitions to mysterious shadows and paranormal phenomena, these stories are truly chilling. Drop your stories in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you won't miss any of our creepy nighttime adventures. Let's get started. It was a snowy night when I pulled into the parking lot of my gas station. I worked the overnight 11 to 7 shift and had been at the job for several months. Before this, I really didn't like this job, but finding somewhere else to work was really difficult. Due to how some things were in other aspects of my life, night shifts were the best for my personal schedule. Still, though, I went in tired every night and struggled to get through every shift. I parked in front of the building beside the only other car in the parking lot, which was my co-worker's. Then I went inside and relieved him of his shift. He left a couple of minutes later, and then it was just me for the rest of the night. My manager had a paper on the desk with some things to get done, but from reading it over, it wasn't all that much. My guess was that it would take no more than an hour total to complete all the tasks. So, I tried to put it off as long as possible to save me from falling asleep once I started getting really tired. As I sat there behind the desk, somewhere around 12 a.m., a car pulled into the station. I glanced out the window, seeing an old SUV parked by one of the pumps. Of course, with it snowing outside, most people were not driving around, but getting a customer every once in a while was normal. I went back to my phone and scrolled through some videos, not paying much attention for probably 10 minutes, until I looked back outside and saw the SUV was still there by the pump. The headlights were off, and the doors were closed, looking like they should be pumping gas. But it had been so long. I stood up and got closer to the window, looking down both sides of the building, but nobody was anywhere outside. If they had been in their car for the past 10 minutes with it off, they'd have to be freezing. It was snowy, windy, and cold, so I honestly got a little nervous for them. I paid more attention for the next few minutes, waiting to see any movement through the dark windows or for someone to get back inside their car. But there was nothing. It was like the car was just abandoned right next to the pump. After some thought, I put on my jacket and went outside. Immediately, I knew I was right. It was way too cold for anyone to be in there with the car off or for anyone to even be outside for more than a few minutes. I rushed over to the car and looked around, then put my face close to the window and tried to look inside. "Hello, anyone in there? Just checking to see if you're okay," I called out. But from what I could see, there wasn't anyone inside. It wasn't exactly easy to see, so someone could have been, but I was pretty sure there wasn't. Now, even more confused, I backed up and looked around at the empty gas station parking lot before starting to walk back. Now with my eyes not focused on the car, I was just looking at the ground and noticed shoe prints in the snow going toward the building. Not really the front of the building, but kind of off to the side. I looked back and saw that they seemed to come from the car. But at this point, I was freezing and didn't want to investigate further without warming up a bit first. Inside, I turned on the small heater next to the counter, putting my hands in front of it to warm them up. I was only inside for 30 seconds to a minute, though, before a thump resonated through the building from behind me. I spun around, not seeing anything, then walked around the counter and to the back. On the floor, there were puddles of dirty water like snow that had melted off someone's boots. Feeling a chill run through me, I stepped closer to the back room and turned the corner toward where the supply room was. Standing in the dark behind one of the shelves, I could see the outline of a figure. They were tall with broad shoulders and had a large scruffy beard. They were looking right at me. My heart stopped for a moment, but after the initial shock, my reaction was to just walk back to the counter. I don't know why, maybe I was just too shocked to react appropriately. After staring at the doorway to the supply room for, I don't even know how long, I quietly picked up the store phone and called the police, whispering for help. Then I endured the most unnerving 10 minutes of my life as I waited. During this time, I didn't hear or see anything from the supply room, which honestly added to my fear. For some reason, the man never came out to confront me. When 2 cops finally pulled in and came inside, I quietly told them where the man was. They searched the room while I stayed by the front. But I was shocked when they came out with nobody else. The man was gone. Watery shoe prints surrounded the back door, but outside were fresh tracks in the snow going straight away from the gas station, straight into the completely dark, empty field that led on for miles. Obviously, nobody could search that at night. But even when they did in the following days, they didn't find anything. I mean, the field was huge, he could have gone anywhere. But it was so cold and windy that night that I was almost sure that they'd find a body. The SUV was taken in for hopefully more information. I don't know how or why, but for some reason, they couldn't find any history of ownership. So that left us with just what we know from that night, and we are still left with just that. Who the man was and what he was doing remains unsolved, and where he is now is just as much of a mystery. I worked at a restaurant with my older brother during high school. It was a small restaurant in an outlet shopping center. Both of us were waiters, but since the place was small, we often helped out with other tasks like washing dishes, making deliveries, or anything else they needed. After just a year of working there, my brother graduated high school and chose to go to college, so he left. However, I continued working there. This happened a few months before I eventually left the job. It was a Friday, so I was working a later shift than usual on other weekdays. The restaurant stayed open until 12 o'clock every night, but due to school, I usually never stayed later than 8 or 9 in the evening. On this night, I was scheduled to close with the manager. Until 8, everything was normal, with a few people picking up orders for the rest of the night. However, at 10:30, my manager answered a call for a delivery. At 11 o'clock, I was leaving the parking lot and getting onto the road. The address on the receipt was just 8 minutes away. However, a few minutes into the drive, I received a call from my manager. I answered immediately, thinking the customer had cancelled, but apparently, the man called back saying he had given the wrong address. I had to pull over and write down the new address. I typed the new street and number into the GPS, but I immediately realized something was off. It wasn't close, it was 25 minutes away in the opposite direction of where I was going. If they had given this address from the beginning, the order would never have been accepted. I thought about going back to the restaurant and telling my manager, knowing he would understand. However, I was already out, and we had already made the order, so I decided to keep driving. The roads were already pretty empty in town at this time of night, but the further out I drove, the emptier they became. In the last 5 minutes of the drive, I was on the edge of town, where most of the buildings and houses turned into grassy fields and trees. As I approached the street with the address, all I could see were rows of houses with all the lights off. Driving down and passing more houses, a few of them had porch lights on, but it still felt empty. These were not the nicest houses, they were all single-story box-style homes. I parked at the house to make the delivery and stopped outside. As I exited with the food, I felt a strange and eerie sense as I approached the door. It was silent outside, with no street lights and only a few house lights. It was very dark. I knocked on the door and waited. A whole minute passed with no signs of anyone at home, and I was starting to get a bit more uneasy. So, I just set the bag down and turned to walk back to my car. They hadn't paid yet, but the food was probably cold and useless to me anyway. When I looked at my car, however, there was a man standing right behind it. He was leaning as if looking into the window. I stopped, and I don't know if the man heard me or what, but he immediately looked up at me. I could barely make out his face, but he was older. "Do you need something?" The man didn't move. I asked again, but nothing changed. Feeling that eerie sense growing, I looked around, but I saw nothing but trees in the darkness. Then, the man took a few steps back, moving away from my car and standing about 5 feet from the door. After a moment, I started walking slowly, hoping to get in and out as quickly as possible. As I reached the door, the man continued to stare at me from just a few feet away. I cautiously opened the door and rushed inside, but before I could even turn on the light, the guy started yelling. I looked at him and saw him now facing the woods, just screaming. I turned my head slightly to see where he was looking, and in the woods, I could see 2 or maybe even 3 figures hurrying toward my car. My immediate thought was that this was a setup, and I needed to leave immediately before something happened. I turned quickly and reversed out, just as the man next to me tried to move behind the car in an attempt to stop me. I managed to get out, seeing and hearing the group of men yelling at me as I sped away. The police were called, and although not much was found, a few things were discovered. The house I was supposed to deliver to apparently was a vacant property. Technically, it wasn't abandoned, but the owners no longer lived in the state. It wasn't for sale, it was just left as is, deteriorating over the last decade. The customer who placed the order is unknown, but the initial address he provided seemed to have no significance. Who the group was, what they planned to do, and so many other things remain unresolved. But I'll probably wonder about it for the rest of my life. After all, if something had played out even a little bit differently, I might not even be here now. In my 20s, I worked at a retail store, serving as an overnight lead. It wasn't a regular big chain grocery store, rather, it was a local place with only about 8 or 9 locations. Most nights, I'd have an overnight stalker to help out, but it wasn't uncommon for me to spend the whole shift alone. Given the store's size, it wasn't a very intense working environment. A lot of the time, I'd find myself working slowly just so I wouldn't run out of things to do. This particular night, I was alone and working at a steady pace. At the beginning of my shift, I loaded up some boxes and moved into the aisles to start stocking. Since it didn't require much mental effort, my mind wandered, and I found myself thinking about random things, not really paying attention. I went through about 3 aisles until a knock at the front entrance startled me. I almost didn't realize what it was because I was so spaced out, but once I did, I got really confused. I heard another loud knock, echoing through the store. Walking down to the end of the aisle, I looked through the large front windows and saw a hooded man standing at the doors. I went to the other side and said, "We're closed. We won't be open until 8 a.m. The man looked at me but didn't say anything. I pointed at the closed sign on the door, repeating, "We're closed. Sorry." The man continued to look at me for a few seconds, then turned and walked away. I watched him until he was out of sight, but it didn't seem like he had parked anywhere. The whole thing was odd, to say the least, but I figured he was just at the wrong place or something. I went back to stocking shelves and eventually forgot about the man. By 2 a.m., I had gone through half of the aisles and was ready to take my lunch break. I left the boxes where they were and went to the break room on the other end of the building. I spent about half an hour there before returning to work. As I walked through the store to the end of the aisle I was working on, a man walked past the other end. He seemed to be walking across the store, not having noticed me. I froze in place, feeling an instant rush of fear. Now listening intently, I could hear the man's footsteps moving toward the side of the building I had just come from. I moved into the aisle and hid behind the shelves. The footsteps sounded like they were heading toward the break room, but just before I left the aisle to run and get help, I heard the man rushing out of the room. The footsteps were now sprinting through the store, getting closer and closer. I ran for the other end of the aisle, looking back and seeing the man turning in and starting to run at me. I ran for the front door, getting my keys out and trying to unlock it with shaky hands. The man appeared at the end of the aisle just as I got it open, and just as I stepped out of the building, I saw a bright flash in the corner of my eye, and heard a pop sound that made my ears ring, a gunshot so loud I didn't even know where it landed. I sprinted for my life around the building and made it to my car, hiding in the back seat as I called 911. From what I know, the man didn't follow me outside. He was gone by the time the police arrived at the store. However, they found the back door busted open, along with some heavy tools next to it. The most terrifying discovery was the hole created by the gunshot, right beside the front doors. Why the man broke in and was so aggressively targeting me remains unknown. From his behavior, the police seemed to think it was some kind of mental breakdown or psychotic break, with no real reason to target me specifically, other than the fact that I was alone. I no longer work there, but I can tell you that for the years following that incident, I was on edge every single night. And that's that. Bet you won't be spending the night alone at work now. Stay with us. We've got 2 more paranormal videos for you to click on and enjoy. Until our next video.